Ranger fans, welcome to the latest edition of the Rink Rap Podcast. I am Jim Cerny. Thanks for coming to hang out with us again this week. Yeah, you got it. Switched rooms. I know you see the background, right? It's all different. Where's the guitar, Jim? Where's the Tom Seaver, Joe Namath photo? I don't know. I don't know how closely you look at my background, but yeah, switched rooms up, getting a little different vibe going as we're heading into the summer, supposedly. I know I bitched and moaned about it last weekend about how cold and rainy it was going to be on Memorial Day weekend. In any case, I hope you enjoyed your Memorial Day. If you had a day off on Monday, you got to enjoy that. In any case, no matter what's going on, we appreciate you coming to join us here on the podcast. Remember, like and subscribe right here at the Forever Blueshirts YouTube page. And if you're listening on audio, continue to like and subscribe as well. Follow us on social media at Jim Cerny, at Forever Blueshirts. That's how you can follow me and the Forever Blueshirt staff here for all the latest on the New York Rangers. This week, we're going to really delve into Mike Sullivan, the new head coach of the New York Rangers. And to do that, I'm going to welcome in a longtime friend, Dan Kingerski, who writes and publishes for Pittsburgh Hockey Now. He's going to come on, talk about getting to know Sullivan over the past 10 years, the good, the bad, what he's going to bring to the Rangers, how he thinks he fits with the Rangers, you know, how he's handled certain situations, how he's brought along the kids or not brought along the kids, relationships with, top end stars like Sidney Crosby, how that translates to how he'll work with the Rangers core. Dan's got a lot of insight. Looking forward to chatting with him about the Rangers' new head coach, Mike Sullivan, in just a little bit. Before we get there, I'm going to piss you off right away because I know so many Ranger fans just despise the Florida Panthers right now, right? You hate them. Wow. I love watching the Florida Panthers, okay? I love it. I'm glad they're going to the Stanley Cup final again because I know I get to watch them for at least 4 more games this spring. Now, listen, if they win or lose in the final, it's no skin off my back, as the phrase goes. But I do. I love it. I've watched pretty much every single one of their playoff games this spring, and I've been writing about them, following them, for Sportsnaut as well. There's so much I love about them. I love how tenacious they are. I love the speed that they play with. They don't get enough credit for the speed and skill that they have because we always tend to focus on the tenacious aspect, the relentless aspect, the ferocity in their game, right? How mean they can be. But I love that. I love that aspect too. But it's the speed and skill as well. And, the mental toughness that they have. There's so much championship timber to this team when you watch them play. And listen, they've earned it because they've won a Stanley Cup and they're now going to their 3rd straight Stanley Cup final. They know what it takes, but you can just see it. And it's fun watching a team like that. I love the Tampa Bay Lightning too. I loved watching them, in their runs, 3 straight years to the Stanley Cup final. I love that. But I might enjoy the Florida Panthers even more. It's that mix of just how mean they can be, how disciplined they can be defensively, just how they can explode offensively. They're so tenacious. I know that's the word I've used twice already. Relentless. Love their hunger for the puck. Hunger to figure out ways to win the game. And here's another adjective they used after the game. I think Brad Marchand's the one who used it. He said, there's just a sense of calm. They're losing game 5, 2-0. A couple early Sebastian Aho goals in the first period against, they're coming off a 3-0 loss at home in game 3. Yep. Sense of calm. We got this. We'll figure it out. It only takes 1 goal, and it's all going to swing back our way. And boy, it did. 1 goal became 2 goals 30 seconds later, became 3 goals in a 4-minute span. When they scored again, 3 goals on 3 shots. Talk about making them count. Get to the net. Make things happen. Man, they're fun to watch. They really are. You got to appreciate what they do. And yeah, I know it pisses Ranger fans off. You hate the Panthers. They knocked you out last year. There's what they got in your way of winning the Stanley Cup last year, or even reaching the Stanley Cup final. I get it. But here's what I also got. I watched their reaction to winning last night, and they were happy for sure. You know, a couple guys used the phrase excited to get back to the Stanley Cup final, but it's all about business with them, right? It's just another step up the ladder to get to the ultimate goal, which is playing in the Stanley Cup and winning the Stanley Cup, reach the Cup final and to win the Stanley Cup. They get it. That's what it's all about. Every single person post-game. You listen to Barkov, you listen to Kachuk, you listen to Ekblad, Marchand, Rodriguez, up and down the entire lineup. Coach Paul Maurice. It's all about just taking another step, being a professional, being there before, knowing how to do it, knowing what's important. Winning the Stanley Cup is the most important. So I listened to that. I also listened to Coach Rod Brindamore's press conference after the game, a Carolina Hurricanes coach. And he was asked this great question. I wrote about it earlier today. How do you measure the disappointment of falling short with the achievement of getting to this stage? Boy, did that make me think about the New York Rangers. Because you know what? I get it. Last year's the aberration to me. I think they're going to be a playoff team this year. And I think they've done a lot of good things leading up to this past season. This past season sucked. Okay? Get it. Totally. They got to bounce back. I think they will, especially under the leadership of Mike Sullivan. I think he's the right guy at the right time for the right group. Chris Drury's still got to tweak that roster to get it right. It's Neil Smith. He and I had a conversation this week. Neil believes that they're a playoff team like I do. He doesn't believe they're a Stanley Cup contender, though. There's a difference. There's a difference. You can be the Minnesota Wild, make the playoffs almost every year, but not really be a contender for the championship. Rangers, let me circle back to how Brindamore answered that question. He says it's the craziest thing that we get this far and all we're hearing is negativity from everybody. I've got nothing but pride with this group. And it made me think that, coupled with the reaction from the Florida Panthers, how professionally they handled winning and advancing to the Stanley Cup final, that two things can be true here. And I wrote a column on it, and it's a phrase, it's just the phrase I came up with that kept ringing in my head and became the tenor of my column, which was the Rangers core has what the Rangers have accomplished is not nothing, but it's not enough either. It's not nothing, though, to go to 2 conference finals in a 3-year span. That's not nothing. Toss in a President's Trophy win as well. That's not nothing. It's not easy. This is not an easy league. So as it relates to the Carolina Hurricanes, they've made the playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, all 7 seasons that Rod Brindamore has been head coach. They've won at least 1 round each season. They've made it to the conference finals 3 times in those 7 seasons. That's not nothing. And Rod Brindamore wanted his players and the fans to know that, to feel that there shouldn't be this anger and animosity, among the fan base and maybe even within the organization, that they didn't get past the defending champions and reach the Stanley Cup final again. Rangers and Hurricanes, there's a lot of similarities here. But it's not nothing what the Carolina Hurricanes have accomplished. And it's the same thing for the New York Rangers. And take it back to the John Tortorella days, starting with that 2011-2012 season. Right? Great. That began a stretch of 3 conference final runs in a 4-year stretch. In there, you also made the Stanley Cup final in 2014. So since then to now, that is 5 conference finals that your team has gone to. 1 Stanley Cup final and 2 President's Trophy wins as regular season champions. That's not nothing. But it's not enough either. So you don't want to rest on the laurels, but you should acknowledge that's pretty darn good. That's a good run for an organization. Factoring in, too, that the Rangers had a rebuild in there in between, that one group and the current group. And that rebuild wasn't that long when you think about it. When you look at some of these other organizations and how long it takes them to get back on track to do a complete rebuild, Rangers rebuild, as far as rebuilds go was pretty quick. So it's a good job by the organization there. But again, what they accomplished in the last decade plus is not nothing. But you know what? They haven't won the Stanley Cup since 1994. So what they've accomplished is not enough either. And listen, Mike Sullivan doesn't need any, advice from me about the message that he sends to his new team when he takes over, he's taken over as head coach, but when he meets with the players and starts to deliver his message, this summer, throughout this summer, and then into training camp as well. That's a pretty good one to start with. If you're the new guy, you're the new coach, the guy with 2 Stanley Cup rings, walk into that room and say, listen, it's not nothing what you've accomplished. We've got talent here. We've got a winning culture here. And again, understanding what took place last year. We've got that. You've done that. That's not nothing. But I'm here to tell you that it's not enough either, because we're the New York Rangers and we are going to figure out a way to get to the Stanley Cup final, to get over that hump. Chris Drury's going to make moves. I'm going to bring my experience, I being Mike Sullivan. I'm going to bring my experience of what it takes to be a winner to this room. Because what you've done, and we as an organization have done, it's not nothing, but it's not enough. I think that's a good message to send to the players. It's respectful of what they've done, but it puts them on notice, lets them know, not good enough either. Not good enough. You only get so many cracks at this thing. 5 conference final cracks for the Rangers in the last decade plus. That's pretty darn good. 3 for the Carolinas in the last 7, for the Carolina Hurricanes in the past 7 seasons. That's pretty darn good. But you got to get over the hump too. Mike Sullivan is going to be a big part of that bridge to try and push this team over that hump. And I know coming off the season that they just had, you may be saying, what are we talking about? Stanley Cup and Stanley Cup final and everything. It's a bigger picture that I'm looking at here. But that's why Mike Sullivan's here. That's why it's not bringing in, a minor league coach that's never coached in the NHL before. That's why for this group, that's why Chris Drury went out and brought Mike Sullivan in. Yeah, it's to get him back into the playoffs, but it's to get him over the hump once they're in the playoffs too. And that's why Chris Drury's trying to remake this roster. Not saying he's making all the right decisions. Certainly not saying how he's handled respected veterans, Jacob Trouba, Barclay Goodrow. We're not going to go down that road, but those are the names. The way he's handled things have been right. Needs to learn from his mistakes. I think he's got the right approach. Got to do things with this roster to get them over the hump. Now you think you got the right coach there. Is he the right coach? Is he the right coach to get him over the hump? I think he is. But we're going to sit down and chat with Dan Kingerski from Pittsburgh Hockey Now, who certainly knows Sully on a better basis than I do. Be interesting to hear his take, again, about the new head coach of the New York Rangers. So that's coming up next, right here on Rink Rap Podcast, brought to you by Forever Blueshirts. Welcome back to Rink Rap. I am Jim Cerny, and we're going to talk all things Mike Sullivan right now with the guy. He says he knows it all about the coach of the Penguins, covering him for 10 years. Well, I said that about you. You didn't really say it, but that's Dan Kingerski from Pittsburgh Hockey Now. And as I just kind of said, you've covered the man for 10 seasons. What do you think about the Rangers' new hire?
Well, I think it's a really good hire for the Rangers. I don't think it'll be great for Pittsburgh or New York media, rather. I'm looking forward to the Larry Brooks Sully battles on a day-to-day basis, like the old Torch stuff. Sullivan doesn't like the media so much. Jim, I covered the guy for 9+ years, almost 10, every day. I'm pretty sure he doesn't know my name.
Nor does he want to.
Nor did he want to. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. And that's straight out of the Torts playbook. People forget that they were attached at the hip for quite some time.
Yeah, they were attached for a decade, and they had their troubles. And the thing that is very different between Sullivan and Tortorella, which I think is germane to the Rangers, obviously Torts would go into a new place that had problems and make somebody the target, be it Ryan Johansson, the Sedin twins, so on and so forth. Sullivan doesn't do that. Sullivan is not the gregarious team builder, family sort of guy. He really is a tactician, a bit of a disciplinarian with some players. And he really is just a coach who is forever prepared. Having said all that, any negativity is handled behind closed doors. He doesn't alienate many players, at least his core players. Now, some players on the periphery, he has no problem putting them in the doghouse for mistakes far less than some of his core players, but he sort of builds almost in the exact opposite way as Tortorella, right. Taking care of his core, getting his buy-in from the main guys and letting it spread from there. I would assume that works well with the Rangers, although I guess there were some problems with New York last year or this season, wasn't there?
A few. Yeah. There were a few issues. And, establishing who his go-to is going to be. I mean, it worked in Pittsburgh, this philosophy you talked about, because you had 87 bought in, right?
But he also sort of, I don't want to say coddled, but he figured out very quickly how to treat Evgeny Malkin and even Chris Letang, who can be mercurial with a coach and those sorts of things. And once he got, that buy-in, he really didn't need anybody else's opinion or anything. So he was able to sort of run the team in a very unique way. And I think ultimately that was his undoing in the end, when a lot of the guys he needed to lift up were in the doghouse, and the 87s and 71s couldn't carry the team like they used to.
So it's interesting because in New York, you have this core group that's been together for a while. They're well established. They've run through 3 coaches already, that Zibanejad, Panarin group. I'm really fascinated to see what that relationship's going to be. And I would love to be behind closed doors, because I think that the very first thing that he needed to do as coach, and maybe he's done it already, I know he said he's made phone calls to all the players and what have you, is he needs to sit down with Mika Zibanejad and figure out, you in, you out, you buying all the way in, not just for one season, not just when it suits you or doesn't suit you, or your feelings get ruffled or whatever, your feathers get ruffled. Are you in or are you out? To me, Zibanejad was so much the epitome of the malaise that covered the Rangers last season. And I get it. There are a myriad of reasons why. But I think he needs to know that guy is in line. He's not the power figure Sidney Crosby is by any stretch of imagination. But I think that's the first guy that he's got to get in line. And I know it's kind of an outsider's point of view, but since you know Sullivan so well, would you kind of agree that might be really one of the first things he needs to do here in New York?
Well, sure. Yeah. I think, going back to when Sullivan actually was able to squeeze some juice out of Phil Kessel, when other coaches really couldn't, and he just sort of figured out a way to get what he needed, at least until the very end. So in that case, I see the same thing sort of playing out with Artemi Panarin, where he'll figure out a construct to get, what he needs there. Zibanejad will be very curious. I cannot think of a player or of an accurate comparison to Sullivan's time in Pittsburgh where he had a player like that. Sort of half in, half out, kind of, very talented, but not necessarily giving it all the time. Maybe Erik Karlsson over the last couple of years might be, in that same vein. And how Sullivan handled Karlsson, I don't think he did very well, which is part of the reason the Penguins missed the playoffs last season and why they were so far out of the playoffs this season, despite really having some intentions to be in that race. So, yeah, these are the things I'm going to find very interesting myself watching from afar on Sullivan. He was very powerful, very comfortable in Pittsburgh, so he could sort of do what he wanted, and it wasn't that heavily scrutinized. The fans certainly had some opinions. Don't get me wrong, Jim, but the problem was the fans were chasing red herrings and missing the meaty criticisms that could have been laid upon Sullivan. I think the New York media, unencumbered by the baggage and the history of all of this, I'd be happy to help them if they like. But I'm curious how this all sort of unshakes, or how this shakes out, and how Sullivan does deal with players like Zibanejad. I mean, it's been a long time. It was, I think, 2017 when the Penguins were still a bit petulant, and he was going with the just play mantra, trying to get them out of the mindset of complaining to the referees every 10 seconds and getting unnerved by the physicality of the games and some of the extra legal hits that used to be just leveled on Crosby, Malkin, and so forth. They were really spoiled brats for a couple or a few years. And there's the famous meme, you can look it up, of Evgeny Malkin standing up to yell at the ref from the bench.
Oh, yeah.
And Sullivan cutting him off, the sit down and shut the bleep up at full throat at Evgeny Malkin, not at the referee. The referee just kind of does a Yui. He doesn't want any part of this conversation. And that was really sort of a tone setter for, those back-to-back Penguins Stanley Cups. Will Sullivan go back to that? Is he too old to go back to that now that he's in his later 50s? These are interesting questions that I'll be curious to see.
Yeah, and another interesting thing, and I really got the vibe at his press conference, which, by the way, he's a, like you say, he doesn't like the media and all that. He's a master at working that podium and everything.
Oh, right? Yeah, he's a wordsmith. He knows exactly what he wants to say, and he gets his messages out. Yeah,
right. And he's got a very commanding presence. He's got the voice too. He's got like the voice of God, so he commands the room, when he meets with the media.
Very much.
So I was curious, how are the Rangers going to let him, is he going to run the show at his own introductory press conference? And the Rangers were the Rangers. They allowed basically each reporter one question, really no follow-ups. And then they got him off the podium, take a photo with Drury, and head out the side door. It was, anyway, that's an offshoot. I took that off on a tangent. The point I wanted to get to was one of the first things that he brought up, other than his relationship with Drury and building relationships, how that's a real big part of what he wants to bring to New York, was he seems really defensive about his history of bringing along young players.
Yes.
He doesn't want to be coming here known as the guy that, I had Sid, I had Gino, I had Letang, I had Fleury for a while. He really seemed very, very self-conscious about a reputation, whether fair or not, that he struggled in bringing along these young players. So without even being asked about it, he goes, and Connor Sheary this, and Brian Rust that, and Jake Gensel and Matt Murray, and he was even bringing up, Tom Kuhnhackl, for God's sake.
Oh, I missed that little bit. He brought up Kuhnhackl.
Yeah, he was included in that mix. I brought him up, and they all were Stanley Cup champions that first year, big part of our Cup team. So it's a big wind up here. you know him better. Does he, is that like a soft spot for him, that kind of gets him agitated? He's got kind of this reputation or whatever. And how has he? Do you think over his tenure in Pittsburgh, how was he with the younger players? How would you rate him as a guy bringing along the young talent?
Well, that was why I called that sort of a red herring here in Pittsburgh, because there weren't any young players. After that wave that came along in 16, 17 and such, there was, the Penguins had 3 first-round draft picks over a decade. It wasn't like he was stifling these young players. There just really wasn't young players that had the talent or really the ability to be in the NHL. Having said all of that, no, he in no way impeded any young players. His style probably isn't the best for a young team, though, because he's not the hands-on, encouraging, positive sort of teacher. He is a blackboard guy, a motivator in so much as he is a commanding presence.
Yeah.
But he's not the guy to pick up young players who are falling. And it's kind of left to the team to do that, to the young player to do that. I'm trying to think of an example that New York might be familiar with. And the best one I can come up with is probably defenseman P.O. Joseph, former number 1 pick of Arizona, involved in that Phil Kessel trade. Really has kicked around the Penguins organization now for the better part of 4+ years and has some talent. And when he's playing really well, Sullivan loved him and would play him 20 minutes. But when his play sort of suffered a little bit, he would go straight to the press box. And there wasn't that sort of support that you might want. So was Sullivan wrong on most of his young player evaluations? No, absolutely not. He was in the right. But there are several examples of times when if he were a little better with those players, he could have brought them along faster or even, helped them a little bit more.
Yeah. But you wonder too, if it's part of that is, and I'm not making excuses for him, it's just in theory, part of that is when you're under the gun to win. Again, I go back to, you've got Sid, Sid's another year older and Chino's another year older, that constant pressure to win. That's going to be the same here in New York because this is a veteran team. Yes, there's Will Cooley coming along, nice young player. Yes, you want Lafreniere and Keandre Miller and these guys to take the next step and need them to. But by and large, this is a veteran team too, and there's going to be that pressure to win now. So you just wonder whether it's Sullivan, Laviolette, or Gallant or anybody. When there's that pressure to win now, does it typically come at the expense of a young player that may be having fits and starts?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, what do you do with Keandre Miller? You hear it, restricted free agent, arbitration rights 2 years out from being a UFA. He looks the part, but yet he doesn't look the part of a guy that's going to go from here to here, right? How's Sullivan as a coach for a guy like this? I think that's a massive question.
Yeah, it is. And it will come down to part of it will be the player's attitude. Mike Sullivan certainly is, I think, straight-laced to a level 10, an intense, serious guy. As such, he values players who have an attitude that are compatible with him. He doesn't necessarily, he has, how should I put this? I'm trying to tap dance a little bit here for you, James. I don't want to just be as blunt or,
blunt is what I know about you. So
yeah. Well, I think if I were too blunt, it would give the wrong impression.
Yeah.
But there have been some players who weren't compatible with that, maybe too chatty or happy-go-lucky almost, who seem to go, be moved along, right? So I think part of Keandre's personality and how he meshes with Sullivan will be a determining factor there. But also if Sullivan buys into the player's potential. If Sullivan thinks, okay, well, he's had 3 years to achieve these very tangible goals under Laviolette and hasn't, they very well could, Sullivan could tell Drury, okay, get what you can for him. Give me something else. Or, if Sullivan really buys into, we can take him to that level.
Yeah.
I think you'd see Sullivan very much sort of pick him up and do some of those, that offer that support that he does to some players, but maybe not to others.
So, yeah, and that would tie into Lafreniere is another great example too, kind of fits and starts. 2 years ago had the real good, what we all thought was finally the breakout, and then, kind of regressed way back this season. Yeah, that's kind of the vibe here in New York now is, well, let's not be hasty with Lafreniere and Miller. And I'm not saying it's not the wrong vibe or the wrong approach, but the vibe is let's see what Sully can do with them. He's kind of coming in. Neil Smith and I were talking about this the other day in a phone conversation, and he's like, man, they're putting a lot on this guy's shoulders. Lafreniere and Miller, especially the two younger players, let's see what Sully can do with them. He goes, sometimes that's part of it, but sometimes it's on the players too. And he said, Chris Drury really needs to, he's in a tough spot. He's got to back off a little bit because he wants to see, and probably Sullivan wants it to get his hands on these guys. But then at the other hand, Drury's got a much longer history with these players that, he may have a different perspective. I think it's fascinating because I think we are at a make or break point for both of those young players.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. The other thing I think with Lafreniere would be the physicality.
Yeah.
The biggest canard, I think that Penguins fans are, really got off on the wrong foot with Sullivan, was thinking he didn't like physicality. He quite loves it. He wants that to be part of his teams. It's just that you didn't have any in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Right. You had guys like Brian Rust or so who play a gritty game, but by and large, you're looking at a team of Evgeny Malkin and Ricard Raquel sort of players who very talented, not very rough.
Yeah.
So I would think, as well as Sullivan thinks the game and as intellectual as he can be about it, he also probably is looking at himself and his legacy and his reputation, because you mentioned he got defensive about some of those criticisms. He's smart enough to maybe try to intentionally go the other way just to prove people wrong a little bit and really embrace the physicality of Lafreniere and try to put him in roles that build his confidence. Having said that, of course, you're right. They're at a crossroads, and by December or January, if they haven't figured it out with Sullivan, changes afoot, right?
So they thought they had it right hiring Peter Laviolette. He's a guy who came in, strict systems, at least had systems. It never appeared Gerard Gallant really had much of a system, but especially defensively. And there was the buy-in for a year. And then this past year, all hell broke loose. And I know the front office situation came into that as well. Trouba, Gaudreau, blah, 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 how players were handled. And it all fell apart. And the systems fell apart. And this group has now been known to be coach killers, rightly or wrongly. Yeah. Mike Sullivan is Chris Drury's guy. It's the guy that he's wanted for years. So there's going to be no coach killing here.
Yeah. So
how much is a guy who's a massive presence anyway? How much presence does he come in now? Like, is this the perfect? I think it is. I think he's the right guy at the right time for this team, whether they win a cup or, whether they make the playoffs or whatever or not. I think he's the right hire. I'm curious how you both, as a guy that knows Sullivan, knows the division, knows the Rangers, but a little bit on the periphery, how you see it from a bigger point of view.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there would be a better coach, because it seemed like from this angle that the Rangers' great problem last year was a bit of disorganization. for various levels or various reasons. It never meshed. And that was Sullivan's great challenge taking over the Penguins back in December of 2015. They were an absolute unmitigated disaster at that point. There was even legitimate talk of Sidney Crosby leaving.
Yeah.
And it wasn't incorrect back then. Things were that bad, and Sullivan very quickly, within a couple of months of taking over, changed the system, changed the mindset, changed everything to a platform that suited his team very well. If he can get back to that part of his coaching acumen, right? I would think that he is the perfect coach for the Rangers to sort out some of these problems. And I see JT Miller as almost a quintessential Mike Sullivan player.
Yeah.
They could not have a better, Mike Sullivan guy than JT Miller. So, yeah, for those reasons, I really do think the Rangers will be much improved this year. Sure, there might be some bumps and some smoothing out, and guys might try to get away with some stuff, and Sullivan might put the foot down, or guys get away with some stuff like they did in Pittsburgh in the last couple or a few years, where Sullivan was just kind of trying to maintain the team. So yes, I think it will go the former and be better, but there is that possibility that he doesn't want to be the heavy like he used to, and wants to try to keep the team bought in at the expense of some bad habits. So that might be the his undoing, or the thing that really to watch if this goes well.
Interesting. Okay, quick final one for you, and we appreciate your time. Dan Kingerski from Pittsburgh Hockey Now. So Sully's out. Kyle Dubas taking his time, these interviews, and listen, I don't think there's any issue in taking your time. Make sure you get the right guy, the guy that you want. Where do you think it's going to end? Who's going to be the next coach after Mike Sullivan?
There's a few guys, and what we don't know, Jim, is exactly what Kyle Dubas thinks of the state of the team. Because the coach he hires, next week or within 2 weeks will probably not be the guy standing there when they're back in Stanley Cup contention.
Yeah.
They're probably going to go through one or two coaches here. So does he go with a guy like, say, Todd Nelson, the coach of the Hershey Bears, who's 56, waiting for his first shot at NHL, being a permanent NHL head coach, who, is good with young players and building a room and, all those positive vibes, but is probably a little more disposable than if you hire Mitch Love, the Capitals assistant coach, who is the flavor of the moment. Everybody's interviewing Sure. Mitch Love, finalist in Boston, thought to be a finalist in Seattle, and all of it's his time. He's 40. He's kind of defensive minded though too. So, and then you've got DJ Smith, who really helped with the Ottawa Senators turnaround, but they didn't get there fast enough, so he gets fired, very much like I would expect the next Penguins coach to sort of go through, right? You get the team to the bottom and then start them on the way back up. By the time they're on the way back up, you're a little bit stale. So DJ Smith is also another guy I think to watch. And really, those would be my three. If I have to hang my hat on one of those three, certainly people around here want Mitch Love because he is the flavor of the moment.
Yeah, for sure.
I probably would go with Nelson or Smith for the personality, for the disposableness. I hate to say that, but they're more disposable than Mitch Love.
All right, good stuff. He's Dan Kingerski from Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Thanks for a little Mike Sullivan.
I filled 25 minutes by yammering on and couldn't get my words out without offending somebody.
Yeah, you're the last guy I've ever known to worry about offending anybody. Like, come on.
I still do it, but I worry about it a little bit too.
You're so mature now.
Something like that.
Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Jim.